Ladies and gentlemen, graduating students, welcome to the Bard College Berlin commencement ceremony 2015.
Love, 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 love. There's nothing you can do that can be done. Nothing you can sing that can be sung. Nothing you can say, but you can learn to play the game. It's easy. There's nothing you can make that can be made. Nothing you can say that can be said. Nothing you can do, but you can learn how to be you in time. It's easy. All you need is love. All you need is love. All you need is love, love. Love is all you need. There's nothing you can know that isn't known. Nothing you can see that isn't shown. Nothing you can be that isn't where you're meant to be. It's easy. All you need is love. All you need is love. All you need is love, love. Love is all you need. Da unten im Talen euch Wassers und Trüb, und ich kann dir's nicht sagen, ich hab dich so lieb. Sprichst allweil von Lieb und sprichst allweil von Treu, und der Bisse, der Falschheit, ist auch voll dabei. Und wenn ich dich selber sag, dass ich dich lieb, und du geist mir keine Antwort, so wird mir's ganz trüb. Für die Zeit, wo du geliebt mir hast, dank ich dir schön, und ich wünsch, dass dies anders, wo besser mag gehen.
Welcome everybody. The staff, teachers and students of the college are delighted to celebrate our graduating class and proud to be able to introduce them to those of you who've joined us as our guests for today. Before we do so, we have the very special honor to listen to a graduation speaker unlike any other. Adrian Piper needs no introduction, not only because she is well known, also to all of us, for her work as an artist and a philosopher, but because she's visited here already this year. Her talk provoked a wide variety of reactions: inspiration, unease, awe, and also the wonder, very revivifying in a liberal arts college, as to whether we had witnessed an art event or a lecture. I think this will not be the typical commencement address, and that it will be one to remember. Please join me in welcoming Adrian Piper.
So thank you all so much for that lovely introduction, and congratulations, warmest congratulations to you guys who have made it to the finish line. This is so fabulous, really wonderful. So I thought it might be interesting and useful to, in effect, continue the conversation that we started in February about the value of playing by the rules, since This has been mentioned in the musical interlude, and you're going to have to deal with it very soon. What we talked about in February was really just the beginning of that process. The dilemma was roughly this. If your fellow players do not play by the rules, then if you do, you will lose the game. Whereas if you do not, you will lose your personal integrity. Now suppose your fellow players do not, in fact, play by the rules, because they are playing a game of war. So you must choose between losing that game and losing your personal integrity. Should you play by the rules or not? How much should you be prepared to compromise or sacrifice in order to preserve your personal integrity? And how important is your personal integrity when measured against the losses of victory, game prize, the opportunity to do good it promises, player status, community membership, perhaps even livelihood or life you can expect to incur by protecting it? What could possibly count as significant compensation for these losses? I argued in February that this is not a classic no-win situation. I tried to show how playing by the legitimating rules of a game of skill increases in marginal utility each time its consequences are consistently chosen, whereas playing a game of war by cutthroat rules both decreases in marginal utility and also progressively reduces exit strategies each time its consequences are consistently chosen. I contended that this is true even if your refusal to break the legitimating rules of a game of skill forces you out of the game of war everybody else is playing, and even if this game of war is the only game in town. Now let's look at what happens if you accept disbarment from the game of war, the only game in town, and at the costs and benefits of the one-person game you are then free to construct in its place. Again, I'm going to conclude that all things considered, playing by the rules delivers more benefits than breaking them, even in the worst-case scenario in which your personal survival is threatened. I'll close by suggesting that this refutes Rawls's claim that personal integrity is a merely secondary virtue of form whose content is inadequate to ground a moral view. Disbarment from the game of war releases you to go off somewhere else, alone, to reconstruct your preferred game of skill as a one-person game of solitaire, where you can continue to take its legitimating rules at face value and play according to those. There you are free to play it for the sheer pleasure or challenge of executing its moves, regardless of what anyone else does. In this case, the game becomes one of intrapersonal rather than interpersonal competition. Not all two or more person competitive games can be played as one-person games. Politics, rivalries of all kinds, some team sports are excluded. In a game of solitaire, there is only one player whose level of performance is in question, namely yours. That level now must be measured over time, relative to your initial performance as a novice at one end and your potential for mastery at the other. So you are also free to set the standard of mastery, and therefore the legitimating rules that define it, as ambitiously or indolently as you like. You may think that the standard of mastery required to win the game prize offered by the game of skill in which you thought you were competing with everyone else was too high for anyone to deserve the honor, and so set the bar lower. Or you may think that standard was too low and set it higher, even though this makes it harder for you to win. Or you may think that standard was a good one, just as it was, and that many sharks or sluggards could have won it legitimately had they made the commitment to play by its legitimating rules. You may consider it a worthy challenge to try to achieve in solitude what they declined to try to achieve in legitimate competition. Similarly, the honor deserved, which a game prize expresses, is absent in a game of solitaire, because there is now no one to bestow it and no one to accept it but yourself. We said in February that some players were attracted primarily by the moves themselves, whether or not honor deserved were forthcoming, but that none would play for a game prize that brought no honor deserved at all. By rejecting the sharks and sluggards game of war, You've thereby rejected your opportunity to win that game prize. You've also rejected the independent possibility of actually receiving honor deserved for your victory. So it would be a good thing if you were able to find or cultivate pleasure in executing the moves for their own sake, whether they were worthy of honor deserved or not. Your moves are worthy of honor deserved if your performance in the game of skill, defined by standards of mastery you have set, is up to the mark. They are not worthy of honor deserved if your performance falls short of that mark. Suppose first that your performance in the game of solitaire is, in fact, up to the mark. That is, that had everyone else been willing to play that game of skill according to its legitimating rules, you would have won both the game prize and the honor deserved that you have now relinquished by choosing to play alone. In this case, you gained the intrinsic satisfaction of executing winning moves in a winning game of skill, in addition to maintaining your personal integrity. But you lose the honor deserved that would have been forthcoming from other players had they too played the game of skill. Is it worth the costs? Does the value of preserving your personal integrity outweigh the loss not only of the game prize and what you now recognize to be a game of war, but also of all the concomitant recognition, approval, honor, and power to do good promised? And does it outweigh the disvalue of all the penalties, punishments, and losses you can also expect from having instead chosen your game of solitaire? First, remember that the other players were not willing to play the game of skill according to its legitimating rules. So the fact that you did and won it according to its stated criteria, even though you had no competition, would not have elicited from them the honor you would have deserved if you had. It would rather have gained you their disregard and disapproval for having called the legitimacy of their game of war into question. In essence, you would have been placing your game of skill in competition with their game of war. This is not the kind of competition that brings a game prize other than survival if you win it. The significance of winning a game of skill according to its legitimating rules at a standard of mastery you accept is not dependent on being honored by your peers, although of course this is very pleasant. It is dependent on a winning performance of mastery that deserves that honor, whether you actually get what you deserve from your peers or not. If you have won that kind of victory and are well schooled in the rules, procedures, and formalities of the game, you can just as well do the honors yourself. But suppose instead that your performance is not up to the mark you alone have set. Then the likelihood is strong that had everyone else been willing to play your game of skill according to the legitimating rules you set for it, someone else would have won. Someone who is now playing by the cutthroat rules of the game of war. Should you then have played by the cutthroat rules too, in order to have increased your chances of winning? Would you have done better on the whole as a sluggard rather than a sport? Or did you make the right choice in playing your game of solitaire by the legitimating rules, even though your performance relative to the standard of mastery you have defined is, by your own admission, not a winning one? Even so, your less than stellar performance does not turn you into a spoiler. For we saw in February that there are no tactical or hierarchical considerations that force you into moves that betray your enduring core values. These enduring core values are what make a good sport, also a good loser. They made winning the game prize conditional on preserving your personal integrity. And your personal integrity has now drawn you into the only remaining game, your game of solitaire, whose enduring core values you recognize as your own. So you are still disposed to perform and to continue refining the moves that give those values full expression, even though you are no longer in competition with other players for a game prize, even though you would not have won that prize if you were, and even though your pleasure in executing them may be minimal, because you have already chosen your enduring core values over the game prize anyway. These deprivations are relatively insignificant. Enduring core values are not those which give us momentary pleasure or material rewards. They are those which give our lives meaning. A good sport has values and resources far beyond the game prize. These make the game worth playing, whether she wins it or not. In your game of solitaire, the only game prize that remains once pleasure, honor deserved, and material rewards have been subtracted is your chosen alternative itself, for its own sake, namely to preserve your personal integrity through the legitimating rules by which you play and express your enduring core values. We said earlier that personal integrity is expressed in a game of skill when its legitimating rules dispose you to undertake the training necessary in order to play by it. Not only this game, but also your choice to play it, directly and consistently express your enduring core values through the designated basic actions those rules require of you, and that you now require of yourself. Those basic actions are now directed at mastery of the skill that the rules, your rules, define, relative to a standard of mastery that you also define. So the game prize is now the game itself, your game, defined by the legitimating rules of the game of skill that you chose to honor by accepting disbarment from the game of war. In this respect, merely playing this solitaire game of skill is materially equivalent to winning it. Is this enough to make it worth playing? Playing by the rules of that game that directly and consistently expresses your enduring core values through the designated basic actions it requires of you has several intrinsic satisfactions, whether your moves meet its standard of mastery or not. We also said earlier that personal integrity is an achievement rather than an endowment or an entitlement. Performing those moves actualizes the dispositions in which personal integrity consists. It gradually aligns your perceptions with your thoughts with your speech acts with your other basic actions, and all of your basic actions with whatever objective values they may instantiate and that confer on those actions a subjective experience of worth. The longer you play such a game, the stronger, solider, and more comfortable the connections become between what you perceive, what you believe, what you say, what you do, and who you are. Through regular training, your dispositions of character achieve firmness, solidity, and reliability in judgment that fit them for consultation and deliberation when difficult decisions must be made. Anchoring your objective values in this internal psychological solidity builds confidence and trust in your perceptions, intuitions, and beliefs, as well as in the actions they effect. It is not dependent on competing with other players for a game prize, honor deserved, or anything else. Psychological solidity amounts to having the courage of your convictions, whether or not, whether or not anyone else does. Let me repeat that. Psychological solidity amounts to having the courage of your convictions, whether or not anyone else does. However, the same confidence and assurance can also result from being embedded within a social community in which the connections between what you believe, what you say, what you do, and who you are can be reinforced by following and approving the same rules and conventions that everyone else in the community also follows and approves. By a community, let us mean whatever social milieu, whether neighborhood, town, club, organization, institution, social circle, extended family, etc., whether singly or in confluence, has this reassuring and reinforcing effect on your perceptions, beliefs, and actions. Here, too, the longer you play the game, the more your dispositions of character are strengthened, and the more reliability they acquire to guide deliberation when difficult decisions must be made. In this case, the resulting basic actions contribute to the integrity of the community and reinforce its social solidity. These contributions cement your membership in the community and your social relations with others, which in turn reciprocally reinforce the dispositions that affect them. So influence and reinforcement travel in both directions, between the individual and the community. It is this consensual, communal solidity and approval that confers on your actions the subjective experience of worth. Social solidity amounts to having the courage of your convictions because others do as well. So these two subjective experiences of confidence and worth have different sources and qualities and should not be confused. In psychological solidity, the subjective experience of confidence and worth arises from the internal, mutually reinforcing connections among the various elements of sentient human agency. In social solidity, it arises from the network of external, reciprocally reinforcing connections among the various agents that constitute a sentient human community. Whether the social solidity comprising these external connections suffices to affect a corresponding psychological solidity comprising the internal connections is a moot question. Should these external connections weaken or disappear, and the community's external social solidity begin to dissolve, the internal cohesion of an agent who contributed to it may or may not deteriorate accordingly. There is no certain method for determining whether or not you are anchored first and foremost in your community or in yourself, unless you are disconnected or displaced from your community. Through this disconnection test, you find out to what extent the rules by which you have been playing and which have been expressing your enduring core values through your basic actions are solid enough to survive that disconnection. And you discover whether or not those enduring core values themselves are objective enough to survive disconnection from the consensual communal approval in which they were formerly embedded. Are you beset by doubt as to whether the old rules and values by which you used to live are appropriate to your changed environment? Are you disoriented and adrift in that new environment with no compass of aims or principles by which to guide your decisions? Do you feel under threat by the mere fact that the consensual approval and social reinforcement for the core value basic actions that you once took for granted are no longer forthcoming? Does the desire to replenish or replace those sources of approval and reinforcement cause you to significantly modify those values and the basic actions that express them? Or do they continue to serve as an enduring foundation upon which new adaptations, action plans, and coping strategies can be erected? Just how malleable or stubborn or flexible or rigid or responsive or reliable are you? One way to answer these questions is by residing in alien cultures or subcultures without the protective cover of tourism. Another is by being forcibly uprooted from your own. Yet a third is by confronting the choice between losing your personal integrity and losing the game prize, and therefore between the game of war and the game of skill that you are now, in fact, confronting. In this case, you discover the extent to which your core values, rules, and basic actions endure in the absence of the supportive community network of players in which they were embedded, or the extent to which they are malleable by the changed external factors with which they are now faced. You therefore discover the extent to which they were indices either of external social solidity alone or of internal psychological solidity as well. You find out in which direction value was conferred, whether the community of players was the sole source of values which it then conferred on you, or whether you were an independent source of value that you conferred on the community of players. It seems clear on reflection that values are conferred on a community by each one of its members, but not all members may see themselves as value-conferring sources. Some may believe of themselves that were it not for their membership in the community, they would have no value at all, and that were they not players in the game of war, they would be nothing. By believing this, they may come dangerously close to making it true. If, by contrast, your core values turn out to persist in an intact and reliable form throughout the loss or transformation of your external social milieu, then you have, in effect, chosen personal integrity over the game prize, and therefore a game of skill over a game of war. Discovering that you have made this choice can, in turn, reinforce your confidence in the objective value of the rules you've been following, and a sense of security about the rectitude of the resulting actions. Maybe a bit too much rectitude for your fellow players' taste, even if you have gone off to play your game of solitaire somewhere else. What if the sharks and sluggards regard those values as wrong, or misguided, or dangerous to their game of war, and to the value of the game prize that gives it meaning? What if they regard the prize for which you are playing your game as competing with the prize for which they are playing theirs? What if they regard the very existence of a solitaire game player, even off somewhere else, playing a different game with different rules, as a threat to the authority, influence, and scope of their game of war, and to the rewards they stand to win by playing it? It is then fully consistent with the cutthroat rules of their game of war to do whatever they can to eliminate you from the competition, as now more broadly understood. Now you are competing with the sharks and sluggards, whether you choose their game or not. In this case, your choice to maintain your personal integrity may be very costly indeed. It may cost you not only your social community, but also your livelihood, and perhaps even your life. Surely maintaining one's personal integrity cannot be more valuable than the survival of the person whose integrity is at stake. Can it? Can it be right to be willing to sacrifice everything, including one's life? Not, however, for some cause in which everyone believes and that elevates victims into martyrs and martyrs into saints, but rather merely in order to maintain one's personal integrity, in which no one other than oneself takes any interest. Here you are not tempted to commit suicide in order to get out of a tight spot. Rather, you are willing to accept death in order to protect that anchoring connection among your objective values, your principles, your speech acts, your other basic actions, and your subjective experience of worth. The motive behind your choice is not an empirical inclination toward cowardice or escape, but rather a respect for the rules of your game that outweighs your instinct to survive. And the purpose of your choice is not to end your own suffering, but rather to prolong as far into the future as possible that subjective experience of psychological solidity, of being grounded in a lived connection between your perceptions, your thoughts, your speech acts, your actions, and your objective values. What you are saying, in effect, in choosing this option, is that a life that lacks this kind of internal psychological solidity is not worth living. But how can it be rational to value the legitimating rules of that game more than the continued existence of the player who values them? If you make this choice, you render yourself impotent not only to compete successfully with your fellow players, but also to effect their reform. By rejecting their game of war, you also reject the opportunity the game prize promises to use your winning status to do good, namely to change the rules of their game for the better. Yet whence comes this sudden humanitarian concern to improve the moral and spiritual condition of sharks and sluggards who now have every reason to wipe you out? Our question is by what rules you, not they, should be playing. That you should play by the rule of trying to reform the rules by which others play is not a convincing answer to this question. A more compelling concern is that if you allow the sharks and sluggards to wipe you out in this way, you will thwart your own purposes. You will not only have ceased to maintain your integrity, in addition, you will have secured, with their assistance, your own vivisection into mincemeat. This outcome most definitely does not serve the objective values you profess to hold so dear. If no one survives to embody and enact them, what good are they? But what other alternatives remain to you? Well, there's caving in. One possibility is to play their game of war perfunctorily by their cutthroat rules, even though you have no deep stake in their game prize. This is not necessarily to abdicate your core value to theirs, at least not right away. but it is to subordinate those core values to theirs in order to physically survive. In this case, those values persist in subjective experience and memory, even though they no longer anchor a connection among perception, thought, speech, and action. This disconnect means a loss of that internal psychological solidity that we said earlier makes a life of personal integrity worth living. It engenders doubt, uncertainty, insecurity, bad conscience, self-dislike, grief, regret, remorse, and the familiar psychological mechanisms that keep those emotions at bay. Silence, repression, forgetting, self-numbing or narcotization, and the manipulation of social communication, circumstances, and relationships so as to avoid reminders of what has been lost. These circumstances make it difficult, although not impossible, to resist the temptation to extinguish these painful and internally divisive reminders and to attempt futilely to regain internal psychological solidity by adapting your core values to theirs, after all. Then there's dithering around. A second option is to play by their cutthroat rules for their game prize, but to cheat whenever possible, to covertly refrain from lying, cheating, stealing, etc., whenever it is possible to do so without detection, and to reconceptualize their game prize as merely an instrument for doing good. In this case, you do play the game of war wholeheartedly, since covert cheating and deception are, after all, among the cutthroat rules that define it. And you do accept a serious stake in the Sharks and Sluggards game prize, with the intention of using your winning status to reform the game, should you be successful. But you also subvert their game of war by acting with integrity whenever you can get away with it, and by regarding the desired game prize as a merely necessary means to the further end of doing good. Of course, it is not easy to explain these particular acts of charitably motivated cheating even to yourself, since they thwart your success in the competition for the game prize, and therefore thwart your success in achieving the reform to which you now view the game prize as a necessary means. In this case, it would seem you must rethink your choice. Should you break the cutthroat rules when you can get away with it, thus enabling transient expressions of personal integrity to thwart your ultimate success in reforming the game? Or should you outcompete the Sharks and Sluggards in your cutthroat attitude toward winning the game prize in order to reform cutthroat attitudes such as yours once you win it? These alternatives, as formulated, both exhibit confusion, self-deception, deliberative inconsistency, and avoidance of introspection that undermine their plausibility. Finally, there's toughing it out. A third option might be to make clear up front to the Sharks and Sluggards your intention to play the game of skill and follow its legitimating rules, and see how long you can get away with it before they do you in. In so doing, you draw their attention to your violations of their cutthroat rules, invite their vigilant scrutiny, and thereby increase the likelihood of penalties. Here you are simply asking for trouble. You can best prepare for the likelihood of trouble with a karate course, or a law degree, or supplementary job training in a different field, perhaps, or a large and loyal police dog. Since the Sharks and Sluggards are playing the game of war by the cutthroat rules, they will probably assume at first that you are too, and are therefore lying, or are perhaps even shiftier than they. Or, once they realize that you are not, infer that you are an easy mark. And so you are, because your quixotic action plan of playing the game of skill by the ostensible legitimating rules implies an expectation, namely that your fellow players will reciprocate, that you now know to be false. In deliberately playing by the legitimating rules against others whom you know are playing by the cutthroat rules, you are in effect placing your head on the chopping block and daring them to cut it off. Once they realize that you are serious, they may well conclude that you are crazy, therefore not a competent player, and therefore not worthy of their attention. That would be the fortunate outcome. Unfortunately, since the cutthroat rules by which the sharks and sluggards are playing encourage them to lie about whether or not they are, this may be the only way to find out which game they are in fact playing. In order to obtain this information, you may have to just play your game of skill consistently and observe their reactions, risking a throttling all the while. That is, you must be the canary in the coal mine, measuring the quantity of noxious gases around you by how much of them you can take without choking to death. Once you sense the danger rising to lethal levels, you must make one last choice, either to determine the manner of your death, as Socrates did, or else to run for your life, as Aristotle did. John Rawls demotes the virtues of personal integrity to secondary status as mere virtues of form that are fully compatible with being a tyrant, and from which by themselves, he maintains, it is therefore impossible to construct a moral view. But we see both by the disconnection test described earlier, as well as by the radical choice now under consideration, that this is not true. The very idea of a tyrant deliberately choosing a condition in which he has no one to tyrannize but herself, and therefore no throats to cut but her own, but who rather must work herself up into a lonely lather of glowering malignity, a forlorn tempest in a teapot with no one at whom to hurl her thunderbolts of rage, is more than a little ridiculous. A tyrant just does not have the psychological solidity it takes to be a person of integrity. She is too dependent on the external social solidity of her community to prop her up. By choosing personal integrity over the game prize and your solitaire game of skill over the game of war, although it may mean depriving yourself of the means to flourish or even survive, you thereby deprive yourself of everything you need in order to be a tyrant in the first place. So, what substantive constraints on moral turpitude does personal integrity then impose? We began last February with the thesis that you cannot be said to have personal integrity unless you play by those rules that directly and consistently express your enduring core values. We argue that personal integrity is incompatible with playing a game of war, because that game also generates moves that do not directly and consistently express the enduring core value of winning its game prize. So playing by the rules of a game of war goes too far. It transgresses the limits of moral imperfection that personal integrity permits. That leaves various games of various kinds of skill. Not all games of skill express our enduring core values, and not all that do express them to the same degree or in the same way. So there is plenty of room to maneuver without transgressing the limits of personal integrity. But we said earlier that personal integrity disposes us to resist violating the legitimating rules of those games of skill, which do directly and consistently express our enduring core values, and to resist the loss of voice, initiative, and freedom to protest, which complicity in wrongdoing compels. So complicit violation of the rules of a game of skill that expresses our enduring core values is also prohibited by the requirements of personal integrity. Cheating at such a game of skill, as well as playing to win a game of war, both express a no-holds-barred approach to self-aggrandizement, prohibited by personal integrity long before the vicious extreme of tyranny is reached. So personal integrity comprises the substantive values of internal psychological solidity, external consistency, reliability, steadfastness, independence, candor, personal achievement, excellence, and respect for principles. These may be virtues of form, but they are not mere virtues of form, and do not, as Rawls claims, allow for almost any content. Rawls is correct to notice that the content of personal integrity for a particular individual cannot be ascertained in the abstract, in advance of the situations in which it is thus put to the test. Nevertheless, we find out for what particular content personal integrity allows when we are confronted or tempted by the content of alternatives that threaten or conflict with it, and its particular content is revealed when we pass that test. We have just considered some of these alternatives. They suggest that personal integrity is a game prize that we win by mastering the skill of choosing it repeatedly, whenever such an alternative presents itself. As thus defined, personal integrity is a more than sufficient basis on which to construct a moral view. It is the virtue of choice for anyone who must choose alone, as in the end, each one of us must. Thanks.
Ungeres du Pubertät, gehst du oben den Kirchhof, da findest du ein frisches Grab. Da senkten sie mit Tränen ein schönes Herz hinab. Und fragst du voran, woraus gestorben, kein Grabstein Antwort gibt, doch leise flüsterten die Winde, es hatte zu heiß geliebt.
Vem kan segla på
Utan segla på, vem kan gå utan avlåt? Vem kan skilja oss, vem kan skilja oss utan spela tårar?
Jag kan segla på
Jag kan segla då, jag kan gå utan avlåt. Men skiljas oss, känner skilja oss utan att spela tårar.
Please welcome our BA graduating speaker, Paris Helen Hurst.
We're here. All right. So my initial impulse was to open a Google document to start putting together my speech. And then I started to panic because it felt kind of like a paper. And then I started to wonder, what is it exactly that I'm trying to do for us? And something that Michael says came to mind, and that's, we're trying to give an account of ourselves. Commencement. Commencement is the beginning of something, we all know that. But as we leave this place where we've spent 4 years, I thought the most important task, speaking of tasks or games that we're playing, whether we choose to or not, or whether we can choose the type of game that we play, has to do a lot with this moment of moving on from something old into something new. And I was calmed as I remembered some things that we've learned over the years. It doesn't have to be a totality that I present now. And one of those things is from our pre-Socratic friend Heraclitus, who says, "You cannot step twice in the same river, for other waters are continually flowing in." So in doing justice to that which we've done here over the past 4 years, I can't give an account, but I can tell a story, one story out of many. And that begins with with packing up. So this week we've been packing up our libraries. Walter Benjamin unpacked his library, and I'm sure we've all read that essay. But this week we've been glancing through our books full of underlined passages, notes full of little stars and exclamation marks indicating moments of euphoric epiphany, perhaps. I've been deciding what to keep and what to put in the recycling bin, and what to try to capture one last time as I flip through the books, removing hundreds of little colored tabs from the ones which belong to the library and have to go back. That made me overwhelmed again as I thought of all of the classes I've taken and everything I've read. And so I did some quick calculations. We've engaged with approximately 375 books. We've read 200 to 600 articles, depending on how much you like your secondary literature. We've written approximately 192,000 words. That's 576 pages times New Roman double-spaced, if you don't mess with the margins. We've visited approximately 43 museums, 3 to 4 countries. We've seen about 78 films, and we've looked at, I estimate, 2,760 images, much of that with visual analysis. So I'm assaulted by dozens of thoughts, like little minnows trying to jump in the stream and move along with me as I go, as we move from the calmer headwaters of this place, this heterotopic wonderland of intellectual Arbeit. Into the river of the life world. And it's about embarking upon a journey girded with this education, if that's what we're to call it. We're getting a diploma. I think we got an education. Some people call it an Ausbildung, but we can call it a Bildung. We've talked about that, I think, for an entire semester as well. And so in trying to collect these thoughts, these minnows, these last notes, I turned to our professors at midnight last night, sort of scrounging and in panic, wanting one last kernel of knowledge or wisdom from each of them. And I wanted a Republic quote from Michael, and he gave me a great one, which I'll share with you. Education is not what some claim, putting knowledge that isn't yet there into the soul as though they were putting sight into blind eyes. Rather, this power to learn and to teach is in the soul of each. And the instrument with which one learns must, together with the whole soul, be turned around until it is able to endure looking at what is, and the brightest part of what is, the good.
Yay.
So this isn't about what we've learned. It's about how we've learned, and about all of the frameworks that we've accumulated, and all of the different ways of looking toward the brightest part of what is, and looking for the good, which I know is something that you're all committed to, and we've learned to do better as we've been here. And as Adrian Piper just shared with us, part of this task, this game of looking toward the good and looking at what is that we find ways to share that as we leave this little stream and go into the big river of the life world. And so I'd like to read another whopping quote, this time from Peter, which I think speaks a lot, Peter Hagenau, which I think speaks quite a bit to the different frameworks that we've uncovered by way of the different questions we've asked. We've been through a history of intellectual thought, from the pre-Socratics through the Greeks, through love, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance. We've really done it all. I mean, almost. Depending on what your frameworks are. And so I thought that I would read you this for graduates in philosophy, which puts that into perspective for us as we go out. I understand that which makes philosophy is a willingness to think not about something other than what ordinary human beings think about, but rather to learn to think undistractedly about things that ordinary human beings cannot help thinking about, or anyway cannot help having occurred to them. Such things, for example, as whether we can know the world as in itself, or whether others really know things. For example, as whether we can know the world, as in, or the nature of our experiences, or whether good and bad are relative, or whether we might not now be dreaming that we're awake, or whether modern tyrannies and weapons and spaces and speeds and art, that's a lot of things, are all continuous with the past of the human race or discontinuous, and hence whether the learning of the human race is not irrelevant to the problems it has brought before itself. We're going to be relevant. Don't worry. Such thoughts are instances of the characteristic human willingness to allow questions for itself, which it cannot answer with satisfaction. Are you satisfied? I'm not. It's okay. It's okay. Cynics about philosophy, and perhaps about humanity, will find that questions without answers are empty. Don't listen. Dogmatists will claim to have arrived at answers. Philosophers after our own hearts will rather wish to convey the thought that while there may be no satisfying answers to such questions in certain forms, there are, so to speak, directions to answers, ways to think that are worth the time of your life to discover. So I know that we'll be spending the times of our lives continuing to discover these things. So the directions to these answers and the ways of thinking are what we take with us, rather than some totality, some unit of knowledge, some object that we can take and go with into the life world. And I'd like to say here a moment about each of you, because there are only 6 of us, but there's such a diversity of skill and passion in implementing these frameworks. Maria, you have such a special je ne sais quoi. Which has to do with this incredibly witty and sort of hopefully hilariously cynical way of condensing complex thoughts, things that I struggle with. You come into class and sit back in your chair and smirk a little bit every once in a while and just drop one on us that really demonstrates this ability that you have to distill really serious brain work into a way that's understandable for those of us who work better with images or with something else. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do with that skill, because it's incredible. And Aya, you have a passion and a seriousness which comes to a point when you address issues which are close to your heart, but also close to the cause of justice in the world. And it gives me chills under my robe to imagine. Well, it does. To imagine how you're going to change the world, because you are. You're going to go into dark, complicated places full of disorganized people, and you're just going to show them how it's done, but in a very productive and in a very articulate and in a very classy way. And so I look forward to being able to stand beside you and shake your hand at some point and say, I knew her, back when we were building frameworks. Maria Khan, you're just a beautiful person with the most, I really don't quite have the words to describe it, but your personality and your approach to serious questions that usually sort of make me feel kind of catatonically, existentially frustrated. You don't seem to have a problem with those. You say, okay, well, I think that, and then you turn it all into a bright and forward-looking projection. And I know that you're going to do that as well as you go out into the world. And you have such a skill of engaging all sorts of different people with all sorts of different attitudes, and you don't get frustrated. You just bring people together and help them accomplish. I mean, I'm thinking about theater here, but you do this in other ways as well. It's just impossible to have a negative attitude around you. And so I know that you're going to be a force for jubilant theatrical and human production of great things. Militsa, you're a wonderful enigma. I've always thought that. We were roommates on a trip once during our first year. And I couldn't help but thinking, darn it, this person is going to spend at least 70% fewer words in her lifetime than I will, but she'll say a lot more, a lot better. And I really wish that I had some of your brain power, because I don't know what you have in there, but it works really well. And you delivered your thesis presentation, and I was able to exhale and say, thank goodness we have produced at least one philosopher. You kept apologizing for not making it simple enough, and you were like, I'm sorry, I'm not making Agamben and Badiou simple enough. Well, you did, actually. You did a really great job. And so since you're an enigma, I don't know exactly what else is going to happen, but I really look forward to it, and I cannot wait to read your books and your papers. And if you ever have time for me, I'd like to sit and catch up with you every few years, and you can tell me what contemporary means, so I can try to do something in it. Right. What do I say about the last and not the least, but perhaps one of the most beautiful souls that I know and have encountered at this school? When I think about the elements, when I was flipping through books and looking at notes and thinking about all of the different ways that I could try to organize and categorize what we've learned here, one of those things that's sort of insaisissable, not grabbable, untoable, is this sense of beauty that I think warms maybe our souls from inside as we think back upon the privilege of encountering so many wonderful pieces of art and literature. And you're someone who has the capacity to spark that fire in other people. And with your sort of gentle way of asking questions, by pointing out small details of the everyday as well as of the most complicated texts that we've read, you kindle that fire and remind me, as well as most other people that I think you engage with intellectually, that the world is really beautiful. And it's great for people to be able to do that in such an articulate way as you do. And so I also look forward to having you interpret my world for me from time to time. I have to finish now. So in closing accounts, as Michael always also sometimes asks us to do, I'd like to leave you with just a few reminders. One of them comes from Matthias, who, after being asked sort of what he would tell us about our Bildung, he passed along or reminded us of one of our favorite quotes from the Bildung class. Der Mensch spielt nur, wo in voller Bedeutung des Wortes Mensch ist. Und ist nur da ganz Mensch, wo spielt. Yes. Man only plays when he is a man in the fullest sense of the word, and he is only completely a man when he plays. So be serious, but don't forget to play. And then Laura sent me something that I thought also has to do with this task of looking at that which is in the brightest way, which is the good, and illuminating the beauty in life. And that's a poem written by Giuseppe Ungaretti in 1917. It's a very short poem, don't worry. Mi illumino d'immenso. I light myself up with immensity. And I have no doubt that you're all lit up with immensity, but that you'll continue to do so. Thank you. Oh wait, no, I'm not finished, sorry. I forgot to end closing the account with the account that we cannot give an account of ourselves, but we can promise that we will go out into the world with the frameworks that we've been given and the tools that we've been given and the texts that we've been led through or dragged through, depending on how difficult they were. And for that, we can only be thankful, very, very thankful for the job that you've all done. I'm looking at professors mostly, but also at peers, because you've been the ones who have been there in the dorms talking through these concepts with us. And you professors have spent hours grading our papers and helping us move through these frameworks. And I'm sure that we all have certain epiphanies that we'll take with us, but we thank you very much, and we promise to go out into the world and look for the good.
Thank you, Paris. Well, we can't have you go out into the world without one last reading assignment from your professors. So all of the thesis supervisors have selected a book for the graduating seniors. So for Maria Andrushko, The Odyssey of Homer.
Oh.
Paris first, How to Do Things with Art. For Ibrahim, Voices of the Arab Spring. For Maria Khan, Muslim Becoming. For Milica Labash, The Incident at Antioch. And for Veronica Martinsky, Elective Affinities.
Somebody loves me, I wonder who, I wonder who she can be. Somebody loves me, I wish I knew who she can be, worries me. For every girl who passes me, I shout, hey, maybe you were meant to be my loving baby. Somebody loves me, I wonder who, maybe it's you.
So what's called the charge to the graduates. I think Paris has already given this speech. She's articulated our deep appreciation of all of you and the extremely high expectations that we have of you as well. Even if she hadn't, I think it seems a bit harsh that having done all the hard work of attaining a bachelor's degree, the graduates should be afflicted with a word of advice or the assignment of another task from one of the people who've been teaching them. They've surely had quite a deal of advice from their professors over the 4 years, welcome or unwelcome, as the case may be. And you'll know that the main gesture in the genre of the charge is the motivational imperative. Here are some quotations from the best known of charges to graduates. They could all be from the same speech. Choose what you pay attention to and how you construct meaning from experience. Don't waste your time living somebody else's life. Fall down, make a mess, break something occasionally. Don't talk so much. Revive a working economy. Protect free institutions. Solve the unsolvable. Take action. Learn what you can and move on. Convince yourself of the possibilities and hang on. Never give in. Never, never, never. That's Winston Churchill. Get your own TV show. Have a care for the tone of our civilization, Henry James. Hack the world. If there's one thing I do know about our graduates, is that there is no variation in the genre of the charge that could be appropriate to celebrating their formidable strength of character and their intellectual impressiveness and daring. Instead of advice, or yet another responsibility laid on the shoulders of our 6 graduates, Maria Androshko, Paris First, Aya Ibrahim, Maria Khan, Milica Labash, Veronica Marchinsky, I would like to express, on behalf of all of us, the professors, staff, and students of the college, our gratitude for the privilege of meeting and working with you. Over the course of the 4 years, and most recently in the thesis projects, we have encountered work from you of the very highest order, reflecting interests that you've developed in philosophy, music, literature, politics, and art, interests that go far beyond a mere academic engagement. We will also remember your bravery in seeking out and successfully fulfilling new challenges, in addition to meeting the demands of the program in Berlin, studying abroad in Paris, Oslo, New York, and taking on professional roles in the world of work alongside your studies. We would only wish for you that you preserve all the qualities you've shown us, and that in any new place of study, that you preserve all the qualities you've shown us in any new place of study and work or living that you go to. And I'd like to ask you all to join me in congratulating the graduates and also in thanking their friends and families who've supported them throughout their studies.
Ladies and gentlemen, the graduating class of 2015, Maria Viktorova Andrushko. Helen First. Khaled Mohamed Ibrahim. Milica Labash. Veronica Marchinsky.
What an extraordinary place this is, in every sense of the word. I would like to start by expressing thanks to a few people. First of all, to the choir for all of their songs, all of which, with the possible exception of the Swedish one, were about love. I'd like to thank Thomas Rolle on behalf, in particular, of all of us at BARD, but also I know on behalf of those of you here today, for guiding us through the first 3 years of the collaboration, the partnership between BARD College and what used to be ECLA. It's been a very interesting time. It's had its moments of, I think, difficulty and misunderstanding, but Thomas has been a wonderful guide in terms of managing all of the wonderful changes that have taken place, including the introduction of a new degree program, some changes, but not, I think, major changes to the curriculum. And I'd like to thank him particularly for what I think he's done a marvelous job of, which is making the liberal arts a better known concept, not only in Berlin, but throughout Germany, and even extending to Europe. As you all know, this is a very new kind of an enterprise for this part of the world, and I think Thomas has really helped to spread the awareness of what a special, different, and important kind of education this is. So thank you very much, Thomas. While I'm at it, I'd like to say a word of thanks to Peter Hajnal there in the back for his important role as co-director, co-dean, I guess, rather, during the period when this was ECLA. And this is the last graduating class that actually entered ECLA. So I want to acknowledge that and thank those of you who were here, many of you for years before BARD became involved, and created something so important, so idealistic, but also, I hope, realistic, thoughtful, and important for the world. I can't resist the opportunity to say a few words to the graduates in particular. I wanted to first of all, to read the list of where you are from. I seem to be on the wrong page. Bulgaria, United States, Egypt, Pakistan, Serbia, Moldova. It was a few years ago at this occasion that Jens Reich pointed out what a completely improbable place this is. There is no possibility in the laws of probability or logic that would suggest that such a kind of community could come together here. You are so international, and not only that, but so intimate in your diversity. Listening to Paris talk about each of you, the graduates, I don't know of another institution where this could happen in this way, where you know each other in your differences, in your strengths, in that which you have to contribute to the world individually and also to each other. I think this is a very, very remarkable place, and in many ways, in important ways, I hope that it has stayed the same during the years when it's been under BARD stewardship, and I hope that it will remain the same. I believe that the international character of the student body coming in is remaining equally strong. And I hope that the seriousness and the ethical and philosophical depth of your reflections here will not ever be damaged or become less important, less central here. The world in which you graduate is a world that is full of conflict. The sluggards and sharks are definitely out there. I would like sometime to explore the definition of those two words with you and perhaps with others in this community. It's not an easy time. Economically, the world seems to be in a crisis. Ecologically, it certainly is in a crisis. And there are probably many ways to think about the frameworks of understanding that crisis psychologically, philosophically, and in other ways. But you are going to be now in the middle of it. We will all be in the middle of it, but in some ways we will rely on you And your initiative and your skill and your ability to help us as humans through this time. I want to say that among the virtues that I hope you will have and remember is that of listening. I think you listen very well to each other. Clearly you've listened to your professors. One needs also to listen to those with whom one does not agree, and to understand not just what they're saying, but what is behind what they're saying. I think of this as listening to the listening. If you can listen to the listening, you can also hear how they hear you. And that, I think, is another important skill that I hope you have. But above all, I want to say two things. I hope that you will be bold. I hope that you'll be brave. I hope that you'll be radical at the right moments and know how not to be radical at other moments. And I hope that you will fulfill the promise of this place and of the message of the choir today, and that you'll be loyal to each other, to yourselves, and to this amazing institution and place.